Well, baseball's gone and done it. In an effort to improve the game, Rob Manfred has robbed America, nay, the world, of one of the most beautiful things in baseball, Luis Garcia's windup. That's right. They've taken his baby. They've taken his baby from all of us. Why? Well, because there are a bunch of rule changes taking effect today as baseball opens up for pitchers and catchers. There are some very big restrictions and changes that are coming. And here's the thing to know. They start immediately. There is no phase-in period. So a lot of these drastic changes are going to turn into something that a lot of people are describing as a bleep show. The S word, my friends. So how will this affect the Astros? Are you wringing your hands over how this might affect Luis Garcia and other notable players? I think you should be, but you should also get really excited because it might have some very positive effects really quickly for some marquee Astros players. Let's start off with Luis Garcia. And if you get a little bit confused, don't worry, because you know who else is confused? Although not all that worried about it, Luis Garcia himself. Take a listen to this courtesy of Mark Berman.
I practice, but I still need clarification to see if I can do something or not. I spent like 2 weeks trying to figure out how to do it, like without doing that, and I think I'm okay right now. So, but they saying like it's now a balk without running on base, so that's weird. So balk is when the runner is on base. So
it's only a balk when they told you it's only a balk when the runners are on base.
Yeah, I mean that's what I read.
Okay.
So
So all of this stems from the institution of a pitch clock. And it's not the direct reason that Luis Garcia was singled out, but it led to it. This season, pitchers are going to have 20 seconds between throws with runners on base, 15 seconds between pitches with the bases empty. A 30-second clock will run between batters. The pitcher has to start his motion before the pitch clock expires. So with this, they need to figure out, okay, when do we start the pitch clock? When do we end it? And a lot of pitchers with their deliveries had gotten a little bit ambiguous about when exactly their windup starts. So they said, hey, we're going to batten the hatches down on this thing. And Luis Garcia and everybody else, you're only allowed to take one step at the beginning of your windup, and then you got to let it rip. This is where I'm not as worried as maybe you should be at first blush. Yes, it is a very unique motion, but it's one that he's developed over time. It's not like Luis Garcia has been pitching this way since he was 12. So as he said himself, he can switch it back. The other is that he pitches out of the stretch when there are runners on base. So it's not foreign to him, and it's not like he always has to use this windup. The part that gets a little bit confusing is that it's not a balk. According to The Athletic, if Luis Garcia gets flagged for using his illegal rock the baby motion with the extra steps, the superfluous steps, then he'll be charged with a ball. But all of this is shifting very rapidly, and like many things done in professional sports, it's not nearly as planned out as you thought it might be with several months to prepare. One interesting part of all of this is that Luis Garcia is one of several Astros who will be playing in the World Baseball Classic, at which point he'd be allowed to use whichever windup he wanted. I'm not so sure if it's a good sign if he does use his old windup at the World Baseball Classic. Hopefully by the time it gets down to playing some real games that actually matter for these guys in the World Baseball Classic, he'll feel good and comfortable with whichever modification he's chosen. Now, there is reason for concern with a few other of the Astros pitchers, including Ryan Stanek and Ryan Pressly. Ryan Pressly is amongst the slowest of Major League Baseballs in terms of time between pitches. Ryan Stanek is only a little bit ahead of him, behind him. I don't know, however you phrase it. It gets confusing with tempo things. But only 12 pitchers were slower than Ryan Pressly, so he'll have to make that adjustment. The guy who's a bit of a wild card in this, and I'll thank Chandler Rome for pointing this out, is Framber Valdez, who doesn't have tempo issues, but when he gets flustered, remember when he used to Framber in a bad way? We'd get the bad version of Framber. He learned over time to do his breathing exercises, to step off the mound, to do these things, to get him back in that right headspace. He's going to have to work double time with his sports psychologist, or hopefully he has this last offseason, because he's not going to be allowed to do that anymore. Framber's going to have to truncate whatever relaxation he was doing or whatever he was doing to get his mind back right. Because as we know, he's turned a weakness into an extreme strength. That's what I trust about him. I think he's been through this challenge of figuring out his mental mindset before, and I think he'll do it again. He's already climbed the mountain. Now he's just trying to get up for a better picture at the very top. Now, here's the other side of the pitch clock conundrum. It's that batters have to get back into the batter's box more quickly now, too. So when you look at some of the players on the Astros who have amongst the slowest tempos in baseball, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody that Altuve and Tucker take their sweet time and they have their routines, and it takes a while for them to reset themselves and get back into the box. They're going to have to be more up-tempo with that this year. Altuve is a guy that I might actually expect a little bit of an adjustment period just because he's kind of a quirkier guy. You know, he bites his nails. He has his extended routine between pitches that we've already seen. I guess the one upside of this could be that when he's at opposing fields, this is less time for drunken, angry, hostile, psychopathic fans to be mean to him for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Second rule change, disengagements. I know that Lovie Smith told us over and over again that sometimes divorce is a good thing. Now, disengagements are never a good thing because a pitcher is only allowed 2 disengagements. Hey, Seth, what's a disengagement? I'm glad you asked. A disengagement is simply the pitcher stepping off the rubber, usually to throw to first to try to pick off a base runner. After 2 pickoff attempts now, the pitcher will either get the base runner out or the runner will advance to second base. So this is going to create a huge motivation to steal. We'll get to how that might affect some of the Astros base runners soon. This is all a way to encourage stealing bases, more action on the base paths, and I'm all for that. How will this affect the Astros? The Astros actually had the league's lowest number of pickoffs last year, but they also had the league's lowest number of base runners. I think another factor here was that Maldonado is really, really good at mowing people down at second. So does this provide Maldonado more opportunities to make outs? Or because now the bases are a little bit bigger and it should be theoretically easier to steal second base, is it going to make life harder for Maldonado or make him less of a weapon? That's one of the experiments that I don't think is so easy to see. With a lot of these rules changes, you can say, okay, it's going to be harder or easier for this pitcher or batter. This one, I don't know. It's anybody's guess. If I know Maldonado, who showed up over 10 pounds lighter, I want to say 17 pounds lighter, and sometimes that's not a great idea. I think for a catcher, it's a really good idea. I'd rather have him looking like a young Biggio. So the bigger bases, which we kind of slid into as one of the other rule changes, because this is still about stealing bases. This is where I start to get excited, because who had more steals last year than he had in the previous 3 seasons? Jose Altuve, with 18 stolen bases. He was reborn, reinvigorated. Dusty Baker loves aggressiveness on the base pass. And frankly, Altuve finds enough ways for himself to get out on the bases that he needs to be able to make up for that somehow, some way. Stolen bases would be all right, especially at his age. 2 other guys we should get really excited about with the bigger bases. One, Jeremy Pena. He's the fastest guy on the Astros right now. He just didn't get on base during the regular season as much as we would have liked him to. But he fixed that little hover step in his swing that led him to being able to hit the breaking ball much, much better in the playoffs. So I think he's going to get more opportunities and be more incentivized now to steal a bunch of bases. And then, of course, Kyle Tucker, who's not as technically fast as Jeremy Pena, but just has a knack for getting a jump on things, whether it's a fly ball or a jump on getting to second base. So with that long, lanky frame of his especially, and the base that much shorter, I'm really excited to see if he can get to that magical mark of 30 home runs and 30 stolen bases. Might be a big year for Kyle Tucker, and I don't know, frankly, there's other reasons to get really excited about Kyle Tucker. This right here isn't the tease that I was promising earlier. Big reason to believe that Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez might have even more production in them with some of these rules changes. We'll get to that in a bit. So the biggest and probably most notable for the Astros compared to other teams is the infield shift and the banning thereof, because the Astros were innovators in this field, no pun intended. But when it comes to the infield, defenses now must have 4 players on the infield dirt, 2 players on either side of second base when a pitch is thrown, the penalty for breaking the rule is an automatic ball. So this is something that the Astros started doing much more aggressively than other teams. They've used it very effectively over these past several years in this stretch of their dominance, and now it's being yanked away from them. The pitcher most affected by this, theoretically, would be Framber Valdez, because Framber is an extreme ground ball pitcher. And we know this from some of the graphics, but it's still jarring when you see some of the stats. 314 ground ball outs, which is 41 more than any other pitcher. He has a 66.5% ground ball rate. That's 9.8% higher than the next closest pitcher. Lance McCullers is pretty high up there too, 55% career ground ball rate. So these guys are not going to necessarily have the same support that they used to. Framber is the one who's the biggest question mark. Obviously, he has the biggest gap. Lance is going to be interesting because Lance has said that he's not worried about it at all. I got to tell you, it always seemed like with the shift in Lance felt like when your mom tries to fix your hair. Like, you know she's trying to help, but you don't feel like she's helping the right way, and it's kind of embarrassing. Sometimes he shows visible frustration with the shift. I think Lance understands the theoretical value of the shift, but it's not always executed properly by the bean counters upstairs. So I think that all these guys are confident enough, and Framber has very, very good stuff, obviously. But it is something to monitor, and I think most critically, you have to wonder if Framber, who's under team control through his 31st year, if he's going to get a new contract this offseason. I think that maybe the Astros want to wait and see exactly how he responds to this. The same way as Sean Pendergast on our morning show noted this morning, maybe Kyle Tucker is waiting to see how the shift helps him, because that is the big, big thing to get excited about. And people have been talking about this since last season, but now that it's here, it's kind of cool. If you think about Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez, lefties, pull hitters, who hit into the shift a whole bunch. And when you're watching on television and sometimes you revert to your old school ways and you forget about the shift, you see them poke a line drive right between first and second base. And you think, here we go. And then, the second baseman is lined up in the outfield. And that's it for that. So Tucker has only had 71 appearances in which he did not see a shift. That is in his career. He's got an 845 OPS and a 352 on base percentage when he doesn't see a shift. So reasons for optimism there. And I think, don't just think in terms of Kyle Tucker or Yordan Alvarez's individual stats. When you start alternating lefties and righties, as we know Dusty loves to do, that extra threat and that inability to shift against that should hopefully make the whole lineup more potent. So I am excited as all get out. Sean Pendergast, myself, Adam Spillane are going to be in spring training next week. So highly encourage you guys to listen to Payne and Pendergast on 6:10 a.m. in the mornings, and to please like and subscribe this YouTube. I'm having a blast on here. I have not promoted this channel on social media much at all. So if you have found me, there's a good chance that it was just meant to be by God and the algorithm. Thank you. So subscribe.